Fog, smoke, haze. All these fun elements are handled by the fog prop in Reality, which in turn uses the volumetric fog in Lux. With Lux 0.8, which is still under development at the moment these tutorials were made, a new series of volumetric materials are in development, but we will focus on a simpler type of fog that has been in Lux for a longer time and that is very effective and simple to set up. The fog prop allows you to create effects of visible light piercing through the night, or a haze effect can help you add some atmosphere to your scenes to make them a little less sterile. This is the scene that we will recreate. I called it Portal, and it's based on another free prop, the Keep Entrance by Jack Tomalin. Jack, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Otherwise, email me. If you don't have it already, simply pause this video and go to www.jacktomalin.com and click on the Free Stuff link. You will find it there. You will need to register with the site, which is fine. Jack doesn't spam and he actually has a lot of cool stuff there. Download it, install it, and restart the video. Okay, so let's add the Keep Entrance model to the scene. You probably noticed that the materials for this have the flag for Excel enabled. That's because I created the reality-specific shaders for these materials to look a bit better than what is calculated automatically. The shaders are available to any Reality user via the Excel Share tab. Just click on it, click on the refresh button, and scroll to the list until you find the Keep Entrance. Select that item and click on Install. After a couple of seconds, you will have a confirmation message that the shaders have been installed. Exit Reality and restart it, and you will see that the new shaders for the Keep Entrance materials have been loaded. That's the power of Excel. Okay, now that we have the materials configured, the first thing that I want to change is the camera parameters. This scene has to have a mysterious atmosphere, and I want to go for an exaggerated perspective. When you change the focal length of a camera, you affect the field of view for it. Lower values, between 15mm and 35mm, for example, have a larger field of view. Higher values, from the studio default of 65mm and up, have a smaller field of view. Since the size of the frame remains the same, if your field of view is wider, you end up with a stronger perspective. This is very good for landscape, but it tends to exaggerate the size of objects closer to the camera. For this reason, a small focal length is not a good idea for portrait. It makes people's noses look big and it distorts the shape of the face. For our scene, we set the camera at 18mm, a very wide field of view. In the real world, this would be a fisheye lens. Let's position the camera there. To create this scene, we really need a two-camera split so that I can see the scene from another camera and position the lights and other objects without changing the frame. So I press the number 2 and switch the camera in the lower viewport to be the perspective camera. Since I want to create that effect of light coming from a portal opening to another dimension, I want to have room to move my light freely and have enough travel for the light inside the fog. The room for this set is not very deep, so I will resize it. We are not going to see anything inside the room, so this is perfectly fine even if the textures for the walls get stretched a bit. I'm just going to double the sides of the room, and that will give me the space that I need. Now I can zoom out a bit and add the fog prop to the scene. We can find the prop in the Reality folder in the Content tab. Just add it to the scene. The fog prop is a cube, and you can resize it to include whatever part of the scene that you want to have under fog. Since we want to create this light coming out of the room, I'll have it cover most of the room and extend just outside it, up to the point of covering the visible part of the wall and steps. The exact parameters for the prop are Y position 314.63, Z position minus 175.56, scale at 500%, X scale 212.3%, Y scale 83.1%, and Z scale at 204%. We see that the fog doesn't completely fill the room up to the ceiling. That's by design. We are not going to see that part, so there is no point in making Lux calculate more than it's strictly necessary. Let's save our work up to this point. Fog works best with narrow beams of light that stay controlled. For this reason, I'm going to use a spotlight placed inside the building and pointing toward the door. The spotlight works well because we can set the cone angle to be very small, and that will give us a narrow beam of light that spreads gradually in the distance. So let's add the spotlight and then position it inside the building, pointing out. Let's set the cone angle to 30 degrees, half the spread than the usual value. It's time to do a test render. We click on the Output tab, set the location for the file, and set the output size at 50%. At this stage, we don't care about the overall look of the render. We just want to see the effect of the light in the fog. The effect is working. Although the light is a bit too strong, it overwhelms the scene. We will see how to break it into a system of beams very soon. Let's go back to Studio for now. I'll switch to wireframe mode so that I can see through the wall and find where my spotlight is so that I can position it exactly how it is in my original scene. To make things go a bit faster, I'll type directly the values, which are x at minus 34.75, y at 280.16, z at minus 657.72. X rotation is 180.21. Y rotation is minus 4.79. Z rotation is 178.77. Scale at 164.2, just to make the light more visible in the scene. Before we do another render, let's adjust the parameters for the fog. Fog is defined by two parameters, the amount of the fog and the strength of the light rays. The amount indicates how thick the fog is. You want to stay at low levels and use shades of gray for this. You can change the color of the fog, but it's generally better to use lights to do so. For this scene, I'm going to use 15, 15, 15 for the amount. This is enough to see the fog without washing everything out. If you have experienced thick fog in real life, you know that when you are in it, everything seems to look gray. The rays parameter is basically the amount of scattering that the fog will cause to the light. The higher the scattering, the more visible your light rays become. There is a point, though, where the scattering will be all over the place and cause the fog volume to be simply a white glare that envelops your scene. For this scene, I set it to 17, 17, 17. This is a fairly high value, but not excessive. The parts of the fog that are not affected directly by the light will be pretty clear. This is because reality balances the fog in a specific way. It configures the fog volume to react to the light in the direction the light goes, so that you can see the rays, while at the same time it reduces the reflection in the opposite direction. Light traveling through the fog will always cause some reflection back at the source. After all, fog is made in real life of water particles suspended in the air. Water has the property of reflecting light, similarly to a mirror. In the case of our fog prop, I program reality to reduce the amount of reflection back a bit, just a bit, so that the effect is not as dominant. This brings a good balance to this rather delicate effect. Let's do a test render. There is still something missing. The light shows nicely, but I like to see some isolated beams for it, as if someone or something was standing in front of it. If this is a portal to another dimension, something is going to come through it. It might be standing right inside the doorway. I could add a figure like a Victoria Michael in front of the light, but that would be very expensive in terms of memory and computation. Why waste so many polygons if they're not visible? Let's do it like they do it in the movies, cheating with a cutout shape. If you shine a light through a piece of cardboard in which some shapes have been cut out, you will get some interesting patterns of light projected around. To do that in Studio, we add the plane to the scene and then place that plane in front of the light. After a bit of experimentation, I came up with these values: x at minus 37.07, y at 270.92, z at minus 398.84, x rotation at 98.22, y rotation 5.1, z rotation at minus 1.14, and an overall scale of 189.5. Next, I renamed this plane Gobo. In the Hollywood tradition, to name these objects in this way because they go between the light and the scene. It should be a Go-B, but ended up being called Gobo, and if it's good enough for Hollywood, it's good enough for me. I parented the Gobo to the light, and one thing that I found out is that in this case, we get a better effect if we turn the Gobo to be actually a glass pane with a cutout texture applied to it. I did some tests making the Gobo matte and using the pattern as a transparency map, but the results were not as dramatic as with the glass material. So we're going to use glass. Let's go reality and turn this simple plane into something useful. The Gobo has a single material called default. We select it in the list of materials and then change the material to glass. Transmission and reflections are set to white, and let's place a pattern in the transmission texture. We click on the change button and select the whirls_01.jpg file that I included in the project files directory. This is a pattern used in my Reality Gels Volume 1 package of lights for reality, and it works well in this case. I just included a bitmap with this class. So what we are doing here is to create a sort of stained glass with this swirly pattern. I found that this approach works really well with the fog. Let's also enable the architectural flag for the glass so that Lux uses a simplified algorithm for this and it doesn't spend excessive time on this material. Okay, it's time to take a break. Before we continue adding more elements to this scene, let's recap what we have seen so far. In this lesson, you learn how to place the fog volume, the importance of keeping the light narrow, and we look at the use of the fog parameters. Lastly, we saw how to apply a Gobo or pattern to a light. In the next lesson, we will see the effect of this pattern and finish the scene with the addition of other lights.